Greetings students, I'm Dr. Sadri, your instructor for this course. And here we are at the end of our course and semester. So today what we do is we are going to do Module 12. And as you know, Module 12 involves two different aspects. One aspect of it is talking about future. If you remember the outline that we had, which started, for the country study, started with the basic variables or what we call factors, is that right? Geographic factor, historical factor, cultural, and sociological factor, going to economic and all the way to the foreign policy. And then the very, very last item, if you remember, was what does the future hold, okay? Well, we are not fortune tellers. We are political scientists. And what I'm going to do in the very first video is talk a little bit about the future of the Middle East. As you know, it's one of those most dynamic regions in the world. It's one of the most challenging one to teach because it involves, as you know, three different sub-regions. So what I'm going to do is, instead of making just one prediction, give you ways how we scientists, we look at that in the long run, and what are the methods we use. One of the methods we use is usually we talk about scenarios, okay? So I'm going to first talk about two general trends, one focusing on the domestic aspect, one focusing on the foreign policy aspect, and then I will provide you with some general ideas in terms of what are some of the possible and plausible scenarios that can happen in the Middle East. All right, well, having said that one, let me remind you that we started this semester by suggesting what they call the Middle East, is that right? It's a region that is generally defined all the way from Morocco in North Africa, is that right? Down to what? Afghanistan. Some people, they even include Turkey in there. Well, if you ask Moroccans, they do not agree, or Moroccans or Algerians, they don't think that they are Middle East, but they understand for whatever reasons they have been put usually into that area. All the way from Morocco, we can say, to Libya is technically North Africa. All right, these countries, they have their own geographic setting, political and historical setting, and the trends in their political economy and foreign relations. So in that region, really, we as Americans have not been as active in comparison to the other sub-regions of the Middle East. All right. In fact, if you recall, when with the material that we had with especially 2011 and Arab Spring. Many times when there was a conflict somewhere, especially in Libya, Algeria, or other places, Tunisia, where else, especially when the civil war started in Libya, many of the American leaders, they would say, well, America is going to lead from behind, and we see what our European allies are going to do. Why? Because Europe has had a much closer connection to that part of the so-called Middle East as ever before. So that's one. Then the other two sub-region, one, if you remember, we talked about the area near, basically around Israel, and that would include, of course, Egypt, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and then within that, of course, we have covered, the topic of the Palestinians and their desire to have their own state. And some people even actually include Turkey in that one too. If you notice, we used Turkey in different parts of our course when we were talking, generally speaking, about the Middle East, because Turkey historically has been very much involved. When it was an Ottoman Empire, of course, many of these Arab states were a part of what? Turkey, okay? The rest were somehow under the Persian Empire, the two basically Muslim, empires that they were, rivalry with one another, all right? So in this area, as you know, currently in late 2024, still the hot spot is basically the war between Hamas and Israel from one side, and Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon the other side. The good news, and I know that usually there are not too many good news coming from that part of the world, is that in the last few decades, despite several wars fought in this particular geographic region, the good news is that Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt and another peace treaty with what? With Jordan, as we mentioned. And these are actually the largest border that it has. Then Israel doesn't have a peace treaty with Syria or with Lebanon. And believe it or not, geographically, those are much smaller what borders. However, just because they're smaller doesn't mean they're unimportant. You know, they have been very, very what important. So this is in terms of state-to-state type of relationship. Okay, so it's not all bad news, contrary to what the general belief is in this regard. The other issue that should not be really ignored is the relationship between the state of Israel and the Palestinians. Palestinian Authority is not officially based on the definition that we had for the concept of state is a state. Okay, yes, it has a very significant number of countries around the world recognizing it. But the great powers have not really done the same thing in the same ways. So it's basically a negotiation between the state of Israel and the Palestinians, and then the Israelis, they say that, okay, Palestinians have to have their own, obviously, representation, which, well, as the group has been divided between the two parts of the Palestinian, territory. That one is in West Bank, as you know, we talked about this, and then the other one is Gaza. And one of the major divisions between the two is most of the, middle and upper classes are basically in the West Bank area, and most of the poor classes are in Gaza. And you see the problem that it can cause, because people, they would like to have their own life and everything else, and ignoring the issue is not going to make it go away. So there have to be some serious conversation. Of course, as a professor of political science, what do you expect me to say? My job is basically promote the cause of peace through diplomacy. All right, I'm not, I'm not from military sciences. I don't have any kind of military ranking, so I don't think all the problems in the world are going to resolve with what, with the military power. This is not like 2,000 years ago when basically the Romans were resolving their issue that way, because they were the major power that they were controlling the region. All right, and the region has moved hand in hand between different, ancient empires. Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, etc., etc. Okay, so the future right now for this area is very, very uncertain. Obviously, there have been a lot of innocent lives lost on both sides. Quantities is different, is that right? But I think as a pacifist, I would say that even the loss of one person, one life is too many. You can call me idealist, and that you're fine to do that. But from my perspective, even the one life lost is just too many. So we hope that the leaders on both sides, they come to some kind of agreement. Right now, very frankly, from political purposes, both sides, they feel like, hey, the time is on their side. The environment is very good for them because we are also in an election year. A major election is going to happen in November of this year, presidential election. There is a whole lot of things happening, not just domestically in that area, between the states, in neighboring states, and also in terms of the international scene. One side of it with U.S. election, the other side of it with Russia in war with Ukraine. Then the Europeans are concerned, the NATO is, you see. So there's just too many what we would call variables, all right? Now, last but certainly not least, sub-region would be the Persian Gulf one. And the Persian Gulf, as you know, if you talk about that there are three major regional powers, as you can see in this beautiful political map that shows the borders and everything, Iran, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. We talked about that. Then if you remember in part 2 of module 11, we talked about the smaller countries. Just because they're small, it doesn't mean that they should be ignored. Is that right? Very, very important. So what can we say about this region? As you remember, this is the area that actually most of the oil in the world has been produced. And then the advantage is many of these oil fields are basically close to Persian Gulf. Easy to find, first of all, close to Persian Gulf, high quality oil, which means less sulfur, less, other, ingredient, so that means it's much easier to what? And much easier to basically refine it, much cheaper, okay? And a higher quality oil. So then that's what is easily shipped through these super tankers that they come to Persian Gulf, they pass the Strait of Hormuz, go to the Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea, and either they used to, actually some of them, they used to go through what? Suez Canal, and with all the trouble has caused, especially with, if you remember, the Yemenis got involved, not all the Yemenis, but, the Houthis who are controlling basically a good part of Yemen. They were involved, and otherwise right now, actually not just the super tankers, but also in terms of trade, like 2/3 of the ships that they used to go through the what Suez Canal, they stopped doing that, and they are all going all the way down to what down to Africa, and then basically bypassing it. Okay. Well, this has two implications. Number one, it takes more time, and it costs a lot more money. So the products coming from that part, as you can see, have increased in their price, and that has nothing to do with. I know that sometimes people they're complaining that this and that and this item has become more expensive. Well, some of it had nothing to do with U.S. domestic politics. Okay, some of it has something to do with international trade, and it's happening not just in the U.S. It's happening in a lot of other countries. Okay. So let's make sure that we have perspective. I'm not defending any administration. I'm not complaining about previous ones or anything. But I'm just trying to tell you that we need to separate the facts from opinions. Okay. Of course, I know that some food items and everything else has gone up, but a lot of other products prices have gone up because of the conflict over there. So what can we say about the future of this very diverse region divided into 3 different sub-regions? Well, let's separate their domestic from foreign policy. In terms of foreign policy, I think situation is going to be pretty similar in that is the near future. Okay, North Africa still is going to be closer to Europe. That has traditionally been, pretty close, not just distance-wise, but also diplomatically. And then in terms of the Eastern Mediterranean area, we see some major changes. We see that some of the traditional leaders, and countries that they were involved are less involved. Then some newer ones are more involved. Like, for example, traditionally, Jordan was very much involved because Jordan also has a significant percentage of Palestinian population. But nowadays, we see, from one side, Egypt is very much involved. Is that right? And from the other side, from Persian Gulf, Qatar is very much involved, you see. So in terms of regional foreign policy, we see some shifts. Jordan is not as much involved. Syria and Lebanon basically are not that much involved. They are usually the subject of, this. From time to time, we see that, for example, Israelis are bombarding certain part of Syria because they think that, hey, something is coming from there. Lebanon, with a very, very diverse population, country that, has had always potential for democracy and everything with the constitution that they had, has gone through a lot of challenges and difficulties and everything, politically, economically, and so on. As I mentioned in some of the previous, lectures, Beirut. Historically, I remember when I was a kid, Beirut used to be called, the Paris of the Middle East. It was a city of the peace and this and that, and a lot of international companies, they had headquarters over there. You don't see much of that anymore over there. As you can see, recently, actually, U.S. Government has warned that all the American, citizens, they should leave that area, considering that right now the Israeli planes are basically bombarding different parts of Lebanon looking for Hezbollah or something. So there's a possibility that some American citizens get killed, So of course, we're trying to protect our own citizens. So that has been one of the situations as far as the foreign policy is concerned. Then we get to the, for example, the Persian Gulf sub-region. The alliance and the closeness between Saudi Arabia and U.S. is going to remain. Iraq has been freed from Saddam Hussein, and is trying to establish and empower its own democracy, which we try to help it to establish. It's a very, very fragile country in that regard. Iran has become even more and more under the influence of the supreme leader, Ayatollah, Khamenei, and because of the hostility with the, U.S. and the recent, more tension between Iran and Israel is, still in the top of the list. And part of the other aspect of the changes in the future of the Middle East depends really on what? The domestic part, okay? Which in this course, we mainly focus on that one. I teach actually another course called International Politics of the Middle East, and if you're more interested in the foreign policy aspect, international relation, I suggest you take that one. In this one, in terms of the domestic one, I have to say something very basic, and that is we look at this domestic development in two different areas. Political development, which we are hoping that systems which are closed and not so democratic, they start opening up and they start paying attention to what the public is saying, so they become more and more open and hopefully more and more democratic. Because democratic doesn't simply means that you have a parliament, or building called parliament or Congress or whatever you like to call it, and then you say, okay, so we have the building, so we are a democracy. Well, it really depends on the action a lot more than what just a building and the idea of it. And the whole idea is that people, they would have a saying in terms of the rules that they have to follow. Hopefully the representative, they have contributed to that, as opposed to one person have so much power that what this one person can make all the decisions. Because right now, throughout the Middle East, like the rest of the world, we see the ideas that came out from Montesquieu, is that right? The French philosopher, the whole notion of division of power into the three branches of the government. The legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch has become a universal idea. And the first country that actually established it and put it in its constitution, written constitution, was the US. And that idea has spread around everywhere. So we can see it everywhere. But it's one thing to look at it theoretically, and it's something completely different to think about it in practical terms. In many of these places, there are parliaments, but how much of a power the parliament really has independently? And are there really checks and balances between different branches of the government? Notice that I'm going over these very, very general terms because I provided you with information in terms of examples in the last part of the class. It'd be focused on country studies, is that right? So I want you to think about it. I'm not suggesting that there is one answer to this because, people with different perspectives, they have completely different ideas, is that right? Some people, they say, in the entire Middle East, they used to say that, the three countries that are democratic, the most democratic one would be Israel, and then there's Turkey and Iran, and then Iran after 2009, when there was a lot of questions about the elections and everything, and some, practices happened that was not considered to be so kosher and acceptable or halal, in that regard. Then Iran kind of, in terms of its democracy, has been kind of, attacked, But the bottom line right here is a lot of the leaders in that part of the world, they have to make very, very difficult decisions. And I'm not just talking about countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, even a country like Israel has to make some difficult decision. As you have probably followed with the newspapers and everything, even in Israel there has been that competition between the executive branch, which is very much because of their system close to the legislative, because they have a parliamentary system, is that right? The party that has more, members in the parliament, or in Israel they call it Knesset, is that right? That actually forms the government. So very, very close connection between that. And then really the branch that they had was always very, very independent, was their judicial branch, which their judicial branch in form of a Supreme Court of Israel, very, very, hard-working branch, Our Supreme Court in the U.S. barely passes like 100 decisions a year, okay? And then the Israeli one was doing 10 times more, which is like about thousands, And whenever they were questioning the acts of, Knesset or the acts of the prime minister representing the, executive branch, there were some issues. And as you know, you can Google these things, and there are a lot of articles about that. Prime minister was trying to redefine that one, and then people who are very much for true democracy and transparency, they said, well, if you do that one, then the whole system is basically led by the prime minister, and that doesn't make it as democratic as possible. So the reason I'm bringing this one to you is because I want you to understand, not to take everything for granted and just say, this is all democracy, this is all authoritarian, this is all dictatorship, this is all totalitarian. There are all these different levels and different shades of it. It's not so black and white. That's one of the challenges in the Middle East. Things are not just so clear, black and white. Is that right? There are different shades of gray. So I want my student to have a good understanding, or at least better than average people who do not know much about it. You guys have done so much reading. I'm so proud of you. So continue with that tradition. So that's in terms of the political development. In terms of economic development, well, it depends on the region. In North Africa, they have commodities in addition to oil and gas. They have like, Morocco has a lot of phosphate. Some of the other ones, they have other products and everything. Some of them, like Egypt, they're really depending on Suez Canal's revenue, which has really decreased, and tourism, which again has also decreased, and everything else because of the situation that has been happening. Others like Oman also has been relying on that one. Israel has also, in addition to other sophisticated industries that it has been very much depending on, tourism, people coming, going, things like that. Well, with the war, how many people would take a chance to go to that part of the region, when airports can be closed, when there are rocket attacks between countries and everything else? It's not a safe thing to do. And you already know, you can Google it, that sometimes a rocket can go, crazy and then hit, some passenger, plane or something. And that has happened, as you know. It has happened over Ukraine. It has happened over different regions in the world, all right? Actually, we Americans once, we shot an Iranian passenger, plane in 1980s. Is that right? So if we make such mistakes, anybody else can do something like that as well. And I wanted to keep that one, very clear. All right. So no country is perfect, and no country is what, completely innocent. All right. And that includes everybody. Now, the other aspect of it is economic development. The economic development of the region right here mostly has been oil. Okay. Well, oil is a non-renewable resource. Is that right? There are some countries in this region that they've had the wisdom of trying gradually to move to some other industries. If you remember when I talked about, for example, little Bahrain, okay? Little Bahrain has ship, repair, has a bauxite, offshore banking. You see what I mean? Encouraging tourism. And there are some others that they're coming over there, but very, very slowly, because they have so much oil that they think that they can count on it, like Saudi Arabia. It does have a lot of money. It does have some, started certain industries and promoting it, but it's not something that those industries that can compete in the international market. There are many countries that they produce some products that it's good enough for their own market, but it's not going to be able to, compete at the international market. Look, Russians, they have been building cars way before Koreans. Is that right? And when you go to Eastern Europe, right now, less and less, even in Eastern Europe, mostly in Russia, there are a lot of Russian-built cars, Volgos and Zhigulis and, those type of things. Guess what? How many of you have seen a lot of, Russian-built cars all over the world? How many dealership of Russian, companies? You don't see very much. You see what I mean? So these countries, sometimes they have the same type of situation, that even if they produce something, tires, this, that, etc., etc., is that right? It's just good enough for their own market, because outside their market, the quality is not such a thing that can compete with what similar products anywhere else. So some of them have been a little bit more, and so in that regard, they need to be careful, because if they just keep their eyes closed and they do not think long term, they're going to be a big trouble. Why? Because industry around them is going to change. People are going to move away more and more from fossil fuel to other sources and everything. And then what happened? The prices are going to collapse, and the economy is going to collapse. And one of the major problems in this region of the world is population is growing. Okay, population. I've mentioned this one several times, and there are actually, articles about it all over. Population is growing. A very significant percentage of population in all of these countries is what? Below 30 years old, okay? In many of them, at least 50% of the population is below 30 years old. So very, very young population, okay? And, they are going to have their own families. So the population is going to continue to increase. And then if there's not enough income, there's not enough economic development, there's not going to be enough jobs. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to be upset, you see? And that, basically, if the government cannot provide or meet the demands from the population, that brings political instability, okay? So that's where I like to, end this whole notion of what are the possibilities in that. In that regard, very frankly, it's an open, door, situation to anything can happen. We are hoping for the best, okay? We are hoping that there is enough wisdom, first of all, to bring peace to that side of the world right now in the, Eastern Mediterranean region, where a lot of innocent people are dying. Okay, and then hopefully there would be a lot more cooperation. Like, Israelis and Palestinians can actually do so much together. Like what? Palestinians, they offer basically cheap labor, and there are significant percentage of the Palestinians that are educated enough to do things. Israelis, they have the technology and they have the capital. You see what I mean? The two of them combined, they can do what? They can accomplish a lot more. And by the way, do not assume that things can be always bad. When you look at the history of Europe, the relationship between Germany and France was always horrible. You look at the last, 200 years or 150 years of the history of Europe, it was basically some kind of wars between some version of Germany, and some version of France. Is that right? Look what happened after World War II. They finally came together, following the ideas of David Mitrani, peace in parts and everything else. They started cooperating on smaller areas, and they started, the Germans and the French, they used to hate each other. Look at that right now. You travel over there, the French are learning German, the Germans are learning French. There's a very good connection between the two. They do have even, one segment of their military is, together, common. I'm not suggesting there was a common military, but one segment of the military is what together in terms of the army and everything. So a brigade, actually, there's a brigade that is common between Germany and France. So let's hope for the best. Hopefully something like that who knows, maybe can happen eventually. Not obviously in the near future, though. I'm optimistic, but not in the short term. Hopefully in the long term can be resolved, and that would be good. In this part of the world, again, the leaders, they need to make some major decisions. Is that right? There's just so much you can do by keeping, people under pressure. You can see that one in many of these countries. Is that right? You need to provide all segment of your population with some form of freedom or something. Otherwise, it's going to, backlash, has a negative backlash. There are some changes, as you know, in Saudi Arabia with King Salman, being, not so active, and his son, Prince Muhammad being so active and bringing a lot of changes, and he has made a lot of, improvement in some areas. We can see the same type of notion in some of the other countries, in the Persian Gulf, for example, the Qataris, the family that's been very, very forward-looking. In Kuwait, there are some major changes, you see in UAE. UAE is another small country that has such a significant foreign policy, just pretty much like like Qatar. And then Iran and Iraq are kind of a little bit, slower in terms of some of those changes, but there is always potential for something better. And let's hope that political development and economic development goes hand in hand, because you can't have one always without the other one. Is that right? They will help one another. So having said that one, I hope that one gives you some ideas. Notice I didn't give you one solid idea about that's part of the world. So, things are going to be better, things are going to be worse. So what I told you is just a lot of food for thoughts. So letting you to, make your own judgment, see what you think. It's not my job, as I've mentioned always before, to make you guys a Republican or a Democrat. I'm independent anyway, is that right? And I don't have any agenda, as you know, better to tell you what should happen over there, what should not. What I think is, of course, as a professor of political science, I'm always for the cause of peace. All right? You have any question about this material? Now that we finished it, we talked about the possibilities for future. Always what? You can email me. Thank you.